Okay, this is the Tiny Volcano Workshop. We talk about making these puzzle trays today. First, let's talk about sort of tray anatomy. We've got the base. This one was made out of 1/4 inch MDF, which is medium density fiberboard. It's basically similar to plywood, but it's quite hardy, pretty sturdy. It can support quite a bit of weight, and it's perfectly flat, and it won't warp on you. This one is built for an 8" by 8" tray. We have the sides here, which are, as you can see, this internal dimension is going to be about 8 inches. It's actually 8 1/8 to allow for a little bit of wiggle room for the 8" puzzle that goes inside it. We've got mitered ends here so that we get a nice 45-degree joint like this. And we also have these slots here that are called dados, and that is what receives the edge and supports the edge of the MDF base here. Let's just do a quick dry fit, kind of show you how it all fits together. It's just going to be pretty much like this. I usually assemble this vertically. When I'm gluing it up, it's a little bit easier to do, but it also works like this if everything is cut properly. So more or less, this is what you end up with. And you'll have glued up in these corner joints as well as in the dado slots to hold everything together. All right, let's talk about measurements real quick. So I was saying this is for an 8" puzzle to fit inside it with a little bit of play so that it's not, 100% snug. I'm hoping this comes out pretty well, but you can see this comes to about 8 1/8". So I've got that extra 1/8 of play so that the puzzle pieces can come in and out quite nicely, especially if you're 3 years old trying to fit them all in. It helps out a little bit. That being said, this is 3/4 inch thick pine. So your overall dimension here is going to be that 8 1/8 plus 2 times 3/4 inch, so plus an 1.5 inches. So that brings us out to 9 5/8. So when we're cutting these side pieces, we need to keep that in mind, 9 5/8. As well, on the internal dimension, that 8 1/8, we need to keep in mind as well. So where does that put us with our MDF base here? So each of these slots, these dado slots, I've put at 1/4 inch deep. So if we have 8 1/8 of that internal dimension plus 1/4 inch on either side, that's going to end up with, I cut them down to 8.5 inches. Technically an 8 5/8 should fit absolutely perfectly, but we all know that everything's not perfect. So I do 8.5 inches, and that gives me a nice snug fit with a little bit of tolerance for, a slightly out of measurement piece here and there. All right, so let's talk about actually cutting our frame sides. The pieces that I use are these Select Pine bits from Home Depot. They're about $5 or $6 for a 6-foot section, and hopefully you can read that. They're 3/4 inch by 1.5 inch, so 3/4 inch by 1.5 inch. It makes for a pretty decent frame side for at least the puzzles that I make that are 1.5 inches thick. So anyways, you can get one of these 6-foot pieces of wood for $5 or $6, and that will give you almost 2 full puzzles worth of the 8" puzzles that I make. The MDF, you can get a 2-foot by 4-foot piece. It's called a project panel, 1/4 inch at Home Depot. Again, I think it's around $5 for that. So not bad at all. All right, the stickers are off, and as we had mentioned, to get that 8" puzzle to fit, we needed an 8 1/8 internal diameter, internal dimension, which gave us a 9 5/8 dimension on the outside. If you don't have a miter saw, like this. Forgive that it's on the ground. I haven't built my miter station yet. This one actually has a measurement panel along the guide on the back here, so that's what I use. But you're always free to use a ruler to mark out the length. Oh, thank you, magnet. That's great. You can always mark out, 9 5/8 on here. Make your little pencil mark so that you know to cut to that length. I do a bunch of these at a time. As you can see, I've got stuff for a custom order on some LSP trays, but I do a bunch at a time, so marking each one out is pretty tedious. So either I'll use a stop block or I'll just use this ruler built into the miter saw. Makes it quite convenient. So anyways, let's get to cutting. First step is just to trim the edge off so that we have that first bevel. Okay, so now that we have that bevel, I just run it to my mark at 9 5/8, just like that. And then if you want, you can use a clamp to hold it down like this. I just run them through real quick, so I just use my hand to hold down here. I'm not getting my hand too close to where the blade is. Technically they say don't put your hand any closer than I think right here, but if you know what you're doing and you're comfortable with it, it's not going to hurt you that way. So I just hold it as far back as I can, and I make sure that I'm holding firmly against the guide and against the table so that it doesn't move. And just go slowly with your saw, and you shouldn't have any issue. Okay, so that's one done. Now you'll notice we have a bevel here, but oh no, it's the wrong way. Unless we, of course, just flip it over. This way I can actually get one extra piece out of this 6-foot section than I normally would if I was just cutting them all to length like this and then putting the bevel on them. So I just, back to back them like this and just alternate direction. Now, I wish this piece was long enough, but that's the breaks. Out of that 6-foot section, you're only going to get 7 pieces. So if you want to do 2 puzzle trays, you got to end up buying another 6-foot section. Maybe Home Depot in other places or somewhere else, or if you're getting other wood, you'll get a little bit longer than 6 foot or whatever you need to do it. So on to the next step, which is dado slots. All right, so we're ready for the dado slot portion, which means we're going to be cutting a slot through this with our router table. I have a 1/4 inch. Let's see if we can get a better shot here. I have a 1/4 inch diameter spiral upcut bit, which is going to cut a 1/4 inch groove in here, and I have it a 1/4 inch up above the table, and it's also a 1/4 inch from this back fence, which will be riding the piece of wood along. So a lot of 1/4 inches in there. A 1/4 inch straight bit will also work, but I upgraded to this spiral upcut bit because it clears the chips a little bit better from the slot. and just cuts really nice. It's a white side router bit if you're looking for a high quality bit. So from a safety standpoint, obviously routers can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, or if you catch things the wrong way, or if you feed the wrong direction. This Ryobi router table has a nice little reminder here that you want to go this way. When you're cutting a dado slot, it is important to have control over your piece of wood the whole time. I like to use these push blocks so that even if, you know, the piece slips or something happens or whatever, my hand is not the thing that's going to get torn up by the router bit. So I use this push block. You can get a set of these off Amazon for like $10 or something like that. So basically what's going to happen is we're going to turn it on, and then I'll be running these through. First I'll do one pass to cut the main slot, and then I run it through another time to clean it up and clear all the chips out. When you're doing this, it's important to maintain pressure against the fence and down especially. You want to make sure you're going to get a nice straight cut, because if you were to come away from the fence, you're going to get a squirrely cut, and it could be dangerous and grab the piece and throw it. If you don't maintain down pressure, then who knows what's going to happen. So make sure you're pushing down and against the fence. And that's what I use the push block for. So, all right, let's get it going. All right, so as you can see, we got a pretty nice slot here. I did that first pass to do the main work, and then the second pass to just kind of clean it up and get rid of all the chips in there too. And so that's what you end up with. And just do it for the other three pieces of your frame, and you are ready for gluing it up. I like to lay things out how they're going to go ahead of time. It's always a good idea to do a dry fit as well before you actually glue. Make sure everything fits. You know, make sure you don't have anything like this where, you know, it's not going to fit properly. You want just a little bit of gap, probably like this. Make sure you're not overhanging on both sides. So yeah, but I like to arrange it like this, and I assemble it vertically after the fact, after I've got the glue on. So we will go ahead and get some glue going. I like to put the glue on all of the pieces first, and then it makes it real easy to assemble. So I just do a reasonable bead in each of the dado slots, like so. And so that's about how much glue I get in there. It doesn't squeeze out too much, but you definitely want to make sure you have enough. All right, so we have these four corners. All I'm going to do is put glue here and then here. So these guys don't get any glue on the side. They just get put next to the glue on these other corners. So I just put a bit of glue here. That's about all you need. Then you use your built-in spreader like this. So there you've got pretty good coverage. Now, since this is end grain, the glue will kind of soak in a little bit. So you need probably a bit more than you think you need. But if it looks like this, you're probably doing pretty fine. And it will squeeze out in some direction, so you'll have to do a little bit of wipe up afterwards. So now we'll get the other side. All right, so now start to get your MDF in, go for one of the sides, and now this is where it gets fun. Got it in like that, and it's sort of freestanding at that point. The glue is a little, sticky, obviously, so it keeps it there, but this one you got to go quick-ish so the glue doesn't fall out of the dado slot. It shouldn't, unless you have too much, but there we go. And then I just slide it down flat and try to match up these corners. And there, see, we can see our miter joints are nice and 45 degrees, so that they match up. They're not too gappy. Now, if you don't have a specialized clamp like this, called a strap clamp, you'll have to do something a little different. But I'm going to show you this first, because this is just an awesome little clamp. You can get this for like 12 or 15 bucks on Amazon. PowerTech makes them, but there's other ones. Just search for strap clamp. And basically all it does is have these 90-degree corners. It's designed specifically for making frames and trays and stuff like this, or boxes, whatever. So it's just going to put pressure on all four corners, keep everything square, and make sure you've got a nice glued up joint. You can do this with regular clamps. It's tricky and takes a lot longer. As you can see, this took me like 30 seconds to put it on, especially since I had it sized already. So, and if these don't stay perfectly true, perfectly lined up, that's okay. We had that little 1/8 inch of slop, tolerance in there. So that's not a big deal. You can see we've got glue coming up here. I just wipe it off and get rid of it, or I use a little shop cloth. Get rid of that on the top. It doesn't really matter because we're gonna, at least I sand down these surfaces with an orbital sander afterwards. What we are getting a little bit of squeeze out on the inside here, so I was a little heavy with the glue apparently. Oh well. Again, you can just wipe that up real quick. Try to get as much of it as you can. That will leave a slightly different color on your MDF and your wood there because it's got glue on it. But again, not the end of the world. Happy little accidents, I guess that's what Bob Ross likes to call them. And then I'll usually clean up a little bit. Yeah, apparently I was too heavy on this side. Oh well. Too heavy on the glue, but that's okay. And you just wipe up a bit. That's cool. It's the underside anyways. No one's looking at that, right? Okay. And there we go. So now you want to let this sit and dry for, I usually go at least 4 hours. If I got a bunch of these to do in a day, I'll do 2 or 3 a day. But otherwise, if you want to leave it overnight, that's even better. It'll be for sure cured at that point. And that's it for now. All right, so I've got that strap clamp off. As you can see, a little bit of glue comes out on the corners here. Not a big deal. We're about to sand that all off anyways. And these are not quite flush, like I said. So again, the sander is going to clean that up real good. That little bit of glue that we had leaking out on the bottom here dries relatively clear. So not a big issue there either. Anyways, I'm going to use this random orbital sander with 120 grit on it. It gives it a nice, decent finish and doesn't take forever. First, I will mask up. No, okay. All right, so it's all sanded up. These are all smooth, no issues there. However, these corners are still a little bit sharp. If you don't have a router or you just want to do something different, you could kind of round over all these edges and these corners with the random orbit sander. That's not what I do, but of course I've got a router table set up and ready to go for this. So you definitely can sand it with a random orbit sander like this, or hand sanding, or even a belt sander if you've got that. So on to the next step. All right, pretty much the final step for me is doing the router table round over. I have a 1/8 inch round over bit with this bearing that helps guide it along as you're trimming off, so you can't go too deep. If you have a router table set up, hopefully you're familiar with it and you're good with how it works and feed directions and all that kind of thing. If you're not and you're just getting into router tables, I strongly suggest you watch some YouTube videos on safety and proper technique and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into too much of that right here. You just got to make sure you pay attention to feed direction. For instance, I'll be going like this against the cutting action of the router bit. On the inside pieces, I will be doing the opposite, going this way as it cuts on the inside. That's all I'm going to get into there. But without further ado, let me get some hearing protection in, some tunes, and dust protection as well. Now I sound like Darth Vader. Height protection, of course. And I like to throw another piece of hearing protection on as well, so I don't have to have my music up all the way, you know. All right, and usually I have my dust collection on too, but we're not going to do that for now. Let's go. Now we have rounded over the corners, the edges, everywhere on this. The only little bit that you might want to do a little bit more to is these inside corners. You can just hit that with a little bit of sandpaper, or even a rounded file will work too. And I always go over it with a little sponge sander as well, another 120 bit, just to clean up any of these little edges, and also to get in here and just take a little bit of the sharpness off of this inside corner, because this is too shallow to get it over the bit to round over that as well. So I just take this across, and that's not going to hurt anybody, and there's no splinter options either. So that is it. Pretty much ready to go at that point, ready for a puzzle. So say you don't have access to a compound miter saw, power tool like that, or you're uncomfortable using it, no problem. If you want to do something that's a little more, elbow grease intensive, but a little less scary, it'll take a little bit more time, but you can use this setup, which is just a manual miter saw. You'll have your miter tray here with miter slots set up already at 45 degrees, 90 degrees, even a bevel here, and then just a manual miter saw. This one's pretty junky, garage sale find, but you know, it works. All you got to do is put your piece in there, you know, obviously measure it out to where it needs to be, and just get your saw in and go down, and you'll start to cut through, and eventually, you know, after a little bit of sweat perhaps, you'll end up with the piece cut to the right length, and with nice, clean, mitered cuts there. However, the dado slot, you know, what are you going to do if you don't have a router, or you're uncomfortable with a router? I would say router's definitely the easiest option here, but you can do it on a table saw. Outside of a table saw, there's probably some manual ways to do it, but they're going to definitely be trickier and not as precise. So if you don't have the router, definitely table saw is the way to go. And all you'll do is set your blade, you can see that there, to 1/4 inch up, and also 1/4 inch off of the fence. So let's pretend that's all the right spot there. All you're going to do, pretend this also isn't cut already, you're going to just ride it along your fence and cut that first pass. So pretend I'm doing this with you know, push blocks and all the safety gear and all that kind of stuff. So you just go through, blah, 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 make your first pass. And this blade should be 1/8 of an inch wide, maybe slightly under. So in order to get that slot to 1/4 inch, you're going to have to make at least 2 passes on this. So after that first pass, you'll just adjust your fence over, you know, whichever way it needs to go. And then make one more pass and widen that slot a bit, and that should put it at 1/4 inch. If it's not, you know, measure it, and then, you know, move your fence a little bit more to where it needs to go. I would encourage you to do all 4 sides, 1 pass, and then move your fence, and then do all 4 of these sides, you know, all 4 of the frame sides for that second pass, just so that you can ensure that this slot is in the same place on every side, so that all the corners line up properly. And that's the alternative method there. So if you don't have a router, or you don't have a, you know, sliding compound miter saw, then that should get you to where you need to be. The other way to make these mitered cuts is to use your table saw and bevel your blade, and then run your piece through with your, you know, with your miter. This is not the one designed for this table saw, but it's, you know, I use a crosscut sled instead. But you would just run it through like that. So you would just bevel that to 45 degrees and run it through. It would be very important to make sure that this is actually 45 degrees so that your joints line up properly, and you don't have, you know, one at 50 degrees and the other one at 50 degrees, and they don't line up, so you'll have some gaps there. So make sure this is 45 when you're making those cuts.